How do you put a price tag on something you can't even touch? Like a famous brand name or a company's secret recipe. Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that very question. We're breaking down the world of transfer pricing audits for intangible assets right here in Indonesia. This is a huge deal for any company that operates globally, so let's dive in and see how it really works. So, here's the game plan. We're going to walk through this just like an auditor would. First, we'll get clear on what an intangible even is. Then we'll look at the first moves an auditor makes. After that, we'll unpack the 5 key factors they use to analyze everything. Then we'll see how they hunt for a fair benchmark. And finally, how all of that leads to picking the right pricing method. Let's get to it. All right, let's start with the absolute basics. Before we can get into the nitty-gritty of the audit process, we have to be on the same page about what's actually being audited in the first place. We hear this term intangible asset thrown around all the time, right? But what does it actually mean in the real world, especially when the tax man comes calling? The official definition is pretty straightforward, actually. It's something your company owns that has value. You just can't physically hold it. It's basically the secret sauce that makes a company special and profitable, but you can't exactly stick it in a warehouse. And this isn't some weird, abstract financial stuff. We are talking about things businesses use every single day. Things like patents that protect a cool new invention, trademarks like a logo everyone recognizes, trade secrets like a closely guarded recipe, and of course that special know-how that just makes a company run better than anyone else. Okay, so now we know what we're talking about. Let's move on to how an auditor actually gets the ball rolling on their investigation. The very first thing an auditor does, their starting point, is to pinpoint the specific transaction they need to look at. We're talking about a deal involving one of those intangible assets between 2 companies that are related to each other. That's ground zero. But hold on. Before they even start crunching the numbers on that transaction, they have to hit pause. They take a big step back because they're required to do a deep dive into the company's entire industry first. Now, you might be asking, why the detour? Well, it's because context is everything. An auditor needs to know who the competitors are, what the market trends look like, and what's just considered normal business in that field. Because without that big picture view, the numbers on their own don't really mean much. Okay, so with that industry context in mind, we're now getting to the real heart of the audit. This is where that single transaction gets put under the microscope. And trust me, it's an incredibly methodical process. To figure out if the price was fair, auditors use these 5 factors. They start with the contract. What did the paperwork say? But then, and this is crucial, they look at what actually happened. Who did what work? Who owned what assets? Who took on the real risk? Because we all know reality can be different from the contract. They'll also look at the asset itself, the economic climate at the time, and the company's overall strategy. It's a truly comprehensive analysis designed to get a complete 360-degree picture. So once that transaction has been analyzed from every possible angle, what's next? Well, you can't judge it in a vacuum. The auditor needs something to compare it to, a benchmark, to see if it makes sense. So where do they find one? They've basically got 2 options. The first, and best, is an internal comparable. That's a similar deal the same company made, but with a totally unrelated business. If they can't find one of those, they'll look for an external comparable, which is a similar transaction out on the open market between 2 completely independent companies. And this is super important. There's a strict pecking order here. The rules are clear. If there's a good, reliable internal comparable available, the auditor must use it, period. And that makes perfect sense, right? It's the best possible evidence of how that company actually behaves in a real, open market situation. It's the gold standard. All right, we're on the home stretch. This is the final step where all of this painstaking analysis comes together to answer the big question: was the price fair? So all that groundwork, the industry analysis, that deep 5-factor check, the hunt for a benchmark, it all flows into this one final decision, choosing the best method for setting the price. This method is what they'll use to figure out the arm's length price, which is just a fancy way of saying the price 2 completely independent companies would have agreed to. And get this, a regulation from 2023 makes it crystal clear that this isn't just a general idea. This arm's length principle has to be applied to every single transaction on its own. You can't just lump things together. Each deal gets its own complete individual analysis. So, what's the big takeaway here? It's that a transfer pricing audit isn't some mysterious black box where a number just pops out at the end. It's a structured, logical, and evidence-based process from start to finish. It's all about making sure the price is fair and reflects what would happen out in the real world. When you see just how comprehensive this process really is, it totally demystifies how tax authorities put a value on these powerful, invisible assets that drive so much of our economy. It really makes you appreciate the incredible level of detail involved. So I'll leave you with this question. Now that you've seen the playbook, does it change the way you think about the value of a simple brand name or a piece of tech?